Aloha and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we pull our favorite books off the shelf, blow the dust off them, and remind ourselves why it is we love them so. I'm Tom Galley. Joining me today, we've got Tony Pasculi.
Hey, Tom.
We are continuing our exploration of Stephen R. Donaldson's The Gap Cycle with the third book, The Gap into Power, A Dark and Hungry God Arises.
Yeah, so, okay. And I'm going to try to keep us, because you're a big fan of the whole series, and I'm reading it book by book for the first time. So why is this book, book 3, a favorite? I know it's a favorite because it's part of this 5-book series. Mm-hmm. But what do you like about this book? What do you like about book 3?
Well, in book 3, in a way, is a self-contained adventure. Right, we've got... The entire focus, all the events that transpire in Book 3, or the vast majority of the events that transpire in Book 3, center on the illegal installation Billingate. But we've got we're bringing characters together, right? So at Billingate, we've got Nick Sicorso with Morn and Davies Highland, but we also have the welded cyborg Angus Thermopylae and his handler Milos Taverner arriving there. And we're beginning to see some of the behind-the-scenes machinations back at Earth. The conflict between Holt Fastener, who basically owns humanity, and the director of the United Mining Company's police, Warden Dios. But this is where, and two answers to the question. One is because we get this relatively self-contained chapter in which Billingate is the focus, and what a rip-roaring adventure that is. But also, this is the point where we start to get a hint, or actually start to see the galactic scale of the plots that are in motion here.
It really does. It's interesting. It's like you say, I hadn't thought about that before, but it kind of contracts and expands in scope at the same time. Like, This is the first book where our characters are not traveling through space, they're just kind of in one place, but we are looking at characters from other places, and they're sort of political threads that are extending to the entire occupied human space.
So in book 2, like you commented, the cast of characters really exploded, and it did. It doesn't explode nearly as much in this one, but the scope of events, despite the fact we're focusing on 2 areas, the scope of events is exploding here.
Well, there's a whole, I think we get for the first time a political narrative, which is sort of there in book 3, or book 2, I mean, but it's really extensive in book 3. In fact, our opening character is Holt Fastener, who's this kind of fascinating guy who's managed to extend his life. He's like 150 years old now, and he's just managed to consolidate power because of his longevity and his ruthlessness. And it's just like, wow, this guy's entrenched. He's never going to go away. It's kind of alarming. Yeah, think about that when you're thinking about longevity research, kids. So
he's like an evil Lazarus Long.
Yeah.
Oh, he was much more long-lived than that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Holt Fastener, the dragon, right?
The dragon, yeah. He's another one whose name, Holt, is very close to hold, and Fastener is very close to Fastener, which is a thing. It's like, and that's not how I would characterize him, as someone who holds fast. Maybe. His entire focus, and I don't know how explicit this becomes and how much it unfolds to the rest of the series, but his entire focus is he wants to live forever. Yeah.
The idea that he's going to die is intolerable. And he is willing to sell out the entirety of humanity in order to make that happen. So he is, through partly luck and partly his ruthlessness, he has parlayed himself into the single most powerful, the single wealthiest person in all of humankind.
Yes.
He owns the United Mining Companies, which owns the United Mining Company Police, the only space battle fleet out there.
Yeah.
What is the thin blue line between humanity and the Amnion? He effectively owns the Earth government.
Yeah. And that's okay. So that's interesting. So this is where we start to get. We got a hint of this. So we get the Amnion introduced in book 2, and we know that they've got their mutagenic manifest destiny where they want to turn everything into more Amnion. And here we find out that the way that Nick managed to cheat them in book 2 is they wanted to use him for something, and he took this drug that prevents the mutation from taking effect.
The mutagen immunity drug.
Yes, which is fascinating, and he shuts down research on this drug. He allows research on this drug to continue, but he shuts down all knowledge of it because that allows him to consolidate power. If human beings feel like they're immune to the Amnion, they don't need the UMCP.
Yep.
And,
there's a lot of acronyms that are very close together.
Oh my God, UMCPHQ is one that I hate encountering in this book because I have to stop every single time.
Yep, UMCPDA, UMCPED, UMCPDR.
That's
PR.
United Mining Company's Police Headquarters, UMCPHQ. So it would give humanity a sort of freedom from the Amnion. They wouldn't need protection as much. He wouldn't have as much power or influence. And that what he doesn't really regard in the same way is that this is a lot like a missile defense system in that, you're immune to our first strike capability, therefore you must be preparing a first strike against us. So it's the Amnion consider it a threat. Yeah. And I don't think he really follows through on the implications of that. Yeah.
Well, it's one of the things. Well, you've not read books 4 or 5 yet.
Yeah.
Give him. He considers it more than you think at this point.
Yeah.
I'll just give you that much of a look ahead.
Okay.
But Holt, and this is also fascinating to me. He is not the longest lived person because he is forcing his mother to stay alive,
yes.
Norna Fastener.
That's a good point.
He's got her basically entombed in a hospital room.
Yeah.
And the entire wall that she faces is covered with video screens.
Yeah.
And he visits her from time to time when he's feeling uncertain or insecure because he knows that all she wants in life is for him to die so she can die. And he'll talk to her, and then try to glean from the things that she says, if he's in trouble, how he's in trouble, what he can do to avoid this trouble. So little boy with mommy issues is running the human race.
Yeah, that was a pretty dark chapter. Yeah.
It's reminiscent of, wasn't Psycho, his mom's name was Norma, right?
Was it?
I don't know.
I don't remember. He was Norman Bates.
Oh, he was, maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, and he takes on the persona of his mother because his mother has been dead for a long time, but his mother is very cruel to him, so he occupies a large part of his psyche. So
maybe it's Norma but that Norna is a tie to me to that psycho mentality anyway.
I think Holt Fastener, for all his issues, has his psychotic tendencies under. He's a functional psychotic in the way that Norman Bates wasn't really. Yeah, he's a capable and functional person, controlling pretty much the entire universe.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is what ends up driving Warden Dios's personal mission to bring the dragon down.
Yes.
Because he was brought in, when Holt, before Holt was as powerful as he was, and Warden believed in whatever it was they were doing, or he thought he believed in it. Yeah. He rose to a position of quite a bit of power himself before he started to realize what might have really been going on behind the scenes. And then he finds himself in the position of, well, I can't confront him because I will lose. He'll fire me, he'll kill me, and keep doing what he's got to do. I've got to find a way to be so indispensable to him that I can undermine him from inside. And hijinks ensue.
Yes. Indeed they do. Oh my goodness, the plot on this is quite complex. It's very, very, very complex, and it's deceptive. And it starts out as pretty straightforward. And it just balloons. This is, what is my note here? I call this a chaotic onion.
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, we get more zone implant fun with Milos. This is something you mentioned in the last episode. So Angus is now welded. He's got zone implants. He's become basically a superhero / supervillain. But he is supposedly under the control of Milos
Taverner,
that's it. And Milos Taverner, the cruel and cowardly bureaucrat that he is, delights in torturing Angus by making him eat lit cigarettes.
Yep. Yeah. And it's not that he bears personal animosity to Angus. He hates what Angus represents.
Yeah.
All right. Angus is filthy. Milos wants to be fastidious and clean. Angus knows Milo's secret. He knows that Milos was complicit in the frame job that has Angus incarcerated. So he fears that information will come out, which one of the notes I have down here, Milos has a really exaggerated sense of his own self-importance.
Yes, he does.
In this book, he convinces himself that this entire plot, all these events that he's undergoing, somehow center around him and his betrayal. That's just an awful lot of effort, Milos. I mean, it ends well for him, though.
He actually has one of the best endings, well, most satisfying for me, in that he, he's one of those people that I kind of, as a character, I despise, that he is not only cruel, but he is weak and cowardly. I mean, say what you want about Angus. I've said plenty. He's a bastard, but he owns it. He's a very straightforward bastard.
And he's a coward, but he owns it.
Yes.
He actually, and I'll say this again in a later episode, I know, he uses his cowardice as a strength.
Yes.
He uses his fear as an advantage.
Yeah, and then contrast to someone like Morn, who is weak and taken advantage of repeatedly, but she has this sort of inner strength, which develops, as you say, along the series. And Milos is just a little shit.
Yes, that's a great way to describe him.
And he goes running to the Amnion. It's like, save me. I fed you false information, but I didn't know. They were lying to me all along. And they're like, oh, don't be sad about this and don't take it the wrong way, Milos Taverner, but we have no more use for you. Yeah, don't let this make you afraid. Yeah. And
this is where we see why people might be, scared of the Amnion.
Yes.
Right? Because they let him into their space. They give him the choice to walk in freely.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
They provide him with an oxygen mask so he can breathe. They stop him from trying to light a cigarette while he's wiring.
Yes, they're looking
they're
out for him.
They're very solicitous to him.
Yeah.
And they're like, you are welcome among the Amnion. And like, hey, we appreciate that you're telling us the truth now, and we appreciate that you told us the truth as you knew it then.
Yeah.
But then they got to that end of the usefulness, and here you go, have some mutagens.
Yep.
It's not optional.
Yeah, I feel like he earns his fate.
Indeed.
more than most.
Now when we ended the last one.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you were talking about Sora.
Soros Chatelaine.
Yes, Soros Chatelaine.
Go to somewhere else here, but so this is a moment where, all right, so Morn has contrived to stop Davies from being delivered to the Amnion, and he was being sent to the Amnion warship in an escape pod. She managed to get out of her apartment, or her compartment rather, reprogram it so it crashes on Billingate. Now the bill has it. The bill will not return Davies to Nick. The Amnion will not suffer Nick to leave without Davies. He is so screwed, and he's gone to see the bill. He's on the verge of bargaining away the mutagen immunity drug, because it's the only thing he's got left that he can sell, short of just physically selling his crew to the Amnion, which a dashing privateer shouldn't do, right? The only reason he doesn't do it is because it'll ruin his reputation, which is all he cares about. Yeah. And Soros Chatelaine walks into the room. This is the woman who, when he was a teen, she had seduced him. She had used him to steal, to gut the original captain's fancy, and then abandoned him, scarred him and abandoned him to die.
Yeah.
The moment she walked into that room, everything about his priorities, everything about his desires changed. Survival became less important than revenge. So he turns and he walks out. And again, this is another nail in the coffin, I think I said last time. Is he's becoming, he was never a good person, but he was living the life that of the image he had built for himself, right? He was the dashing, swashbuckling hero. People adored him. They told his stories. Morn started to take that away from him. Soros is continuing the process.
Morn does some real damage in that regard. First, with a crippling blow to his ego, because she has made him feel that she is in love with him, which is something that he hasn't really experienced. He hasn't wanted to. He's always sort of used women as possessions. He'll sleep with them and then throw them away. A lot of his crew are ex-lovers. And Morn's passion is so intense that it sort of seduces him. And then when he finds out it's false, it's just her using the zone implant to abide his depredations, by turning pain, physical pain, into pleasure, deliberately. So he's shattered, and then beyond that, this is one of the fun things that Morn does. She then starts to refuse his orders in front of his crew, and she basically leads a one-woman mutiny. Not quite a mutiny, but everyone on that crew now doubts his authority and his ability to lead. And without that, because he's all about illusion, he's all about this projecting this air of the certain, the image of the swashbuckling pirate, the rogue, and that really starts to crumble. And his crew don't want to take his orders anymore. Yeah.
And he gave Davies to the Amnion.
Yes.
Right? He gave a human being to the Amnion, and Morn, through extravagant measures and sacrifice, managed to at least delay that.
Yes.
So again, now the crew is given even more reason to question, and they even do start to ask, who's next?
Yes.
Right? You've got a couple of people who know they're not worth very much on that crew.
Yeah.
That was another fun thing that I did like actually about the Captain's Fancy Crew, is that they are all just people that have fallen into this. None of them, well, there's a couple of them that are particularly competent, but by and large, the majority of that crew aren't qualified to do the jobs they're doing. There's just no one else to do it, and there's nowhere else for them to be.
It makes sense because they're criminals, and if you were good at your job, you could do the same job for less risk and probably more pay in a legitimate fashion. This is sort of just true with the criminal world in general. Criminals are people who either are not good enough or want to take shortcuts. Yeah. So if you were actually good, you don't need to be a criminal.
Now, one of the things we should have touched on at the end of the last one, moments before Angus and Milos ship out on their mission, and it turns out the mission is to destroy Billingate. Warden Dios is alone with Angus, and he swaps the data cores out.
Yes.
Angus had been specifically programmed on orders from Holt-Fastener directly not to save Morn Highland. Morn Highland knows that Angus was framed for the passage of the Preempt Act, and if that information were to get out, it would do irreparable damage to the CEO and to his power. So he wants her dead.
Yeah.
Now they stopped shy of programming him to kill her, but specifically he is supposed to not bring her home. Warden Diaz swaps out that data core.
And makes it a priority, which we don't find this out until later in the book.
Even Angus doesn't find it out.
Yes, yeah, he's sort of surprised by this new directive that he is supposed to save Morn. Yeah, so directly opposite order.
This is actually the moment which freaks Milos out completely, right? Suddenly, Angus is doing things that are contrary to what Milos was told Angus is supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And this is the moment Milos decides it's all aimed at me.
Yeah.
Really, it's all aimed at you.
It's a great moment. It's like you think you have the power because you have a gun, you're pointing it at someone, and then, you pull the trigger and it goes click and you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
He's got an empty gun. Yeah, Miles has an empty gun. He does not have control of Angus as he thought.
Yeah. Well, he continues. He makes Angus eat a cigarette right after that. So he knows that he has but he doesn't know what else he might have been lied to about.
Yes.
And this drives him into the loving arms of the Amnion.
I have another characterization here of this book. So again, lots of elements of space opera in this. In fact, increasingly more elements of traditional space opera as we progress through the series. We have space battles. We have an EVA rescue, which is very exciting. We have the augments, and we get more of the Amnion and their experiments and so on. All very exciting. But then it's all couched in this tragic human play of just, people pushing each other around and controlling each other. And it feels a lot more like a Russian novel set in space than an actual space opera to me.
Okay.
So, and I don't mind Russian novels. I read a lot of Russian novels when I was younger. Yeah, but yes.
I don't really have a follow-up for Russian novels. So moving on. And again, this is a moment where Donaldson does this thing that I hate when he does. They have Saurus and the Bill have captured Davies, and they're questioning him, trying to figure out why he's so important to the Amnion, why he's so important to Nick.
Yeah.
And out of thin air, Davies fabricates the idea of a mutagen immunity drug.
Yeah.
And he plants this idea. Now, okay, there is in fact a mutagen immunity drug floating around. It's a carefully held secret, which Nick Sikorsky and his crew have been supplied by a small amount, by the Secret Service of the United Mining Company's police. He's got no way to know this. He completely fabricates it. And yet the existence of this is integral to Angus and Milo's plot to destabilize Billingate before destroying it. It's integral to the overall arc of the story. He's just plucked this out of thin air, know.
The whole thread, and again, you say it pays off in books 4 and 5. That whole thread doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's like it's the prisoner who gets captured, and he says, "Ha, that was my plan all along." And it's like, but this depends on a bizarre series of coincidences that you couldn't possibly have anticipated.
Yep.
So how is this your plan? I don't know what Fastener is doing with this immunity drug gambit.
Yeah, and this is a conceptual problem I have. Now, again, the existence of that drug is critical to what happens in the later books. But I mean, there was a company, Intertech, I think was the name of it, that was doing this research. They were getting close, with government approval. They were getting close to discover a mutagen immunity drug. Hope Fastener steps in. He wants to destroy the research.
Yes.
Warden Dios persuades him, instead of destroying it, to squash it, or suppress it, I think is the word they like to use.
Suppress the information, but not the drug
information,
itself.
and then it's given to the data acquisition arm of the UMCP to complete. But Holt, if he had had his way, would never have let that research be completed.
Yeah.
Which just seems unbelievably short-sighted to me.
Yes.
Now he's playing this careful dance with the Amnion. He's trying to keep an uneasy truce because it benefits him the most. It allows him to accrue the most power in terms of the UMCP, the most funding from the Earth, and it allows him to control trade between the two species. He wants that, but their primary weapon is this genetic warfare. You really think if you were facing an enemy like that, you wouldn't want to take a nuclear bomb like an immunity drug and just not have it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So we mentioned this last episode. It's not quite like having a nuclear bomb. It's more like a weapon defense system.
Yeah, it's an anti-nuclear bomb.
Exactly, yeah. So if your enemy has a nuclear weapon, you want to have a nuclear weapon also, because then you've got mutually assured destruction. If your enemy has a nuclear weapon and you have a nuclear weapon and a missile defense system, then your enemy is very concerned. Yeah.
So I can understand why it needs to be secret. You don't want the Amnion to know it's out there. But as the head of all humanity, the guy who wants to live forever and who's relying on the Amnion in part to make this happen, I want to have that drug if I need it.
You want it to be secret, and that's why it makes no sense to me that there's this plot to reveal it. Yeah, so that is strange to me.
Yeah, there's some, I don't know, maybe you need to read it another time to...
Maybe. Okay.
Or maybe this is just one of those things.
This book confused me a lot, I have to say. I went back, I read the Wikipedia entry. It's like, what did I just read? What's happening here? It's intense. There's a lot going on.
It is intense. And again, some of these things that are confusing will pay off further down the road. Again, the foresight that Donaldson put into this is really phenomenal.
I think that bears repeating. As much as I don't care for this series, it's not that it's written badly or ill-conceived. There's a lot of craftsmanship going on here. There's a lot of very, very good stuff. It's just, it's not my taste. Yeah. So
let's see, what else happens? We actually do, the heroes, if that's the right word, do succeed in destroying Billingate.
Yeah.
Angus is forced into saving Morn because there's no other way that he can save Davies, and saving Davies is a priority.
Yeah.
But this is also the point at which he discovers saving Morn is not precluded. And you've got a fantastic, it's a jailbreak,
yes.
right?
Extended sequence, very action-packed, yeah.
But there's a couple of lovely moments in here. So Nick has given Morn to the Amnion. second human being he's traded off to the Amnion now.
Yeah.
He's told Angus that he can get Morn back if they can get Davies out. So when Morn goes to rescue Davies from the Bill, a couple of fun things happen. One of which is that Davies has this. Davies has had a mental block. When he was force grown, his memory stopped at the point where Morn came down with gap sickness.
Yes.
So he had no recollection of Angus Thermopylae except in the abstract. He knew that Angus Thermopylae was a ship captain. He knew that they had been chasing him. Angus walks into the cell to release him, and that memory block disappears, and suddenly he remembers himself being beaten and raped and abused in inconceivable ways by this, he melts down there in the cell. Very inconvenient timing on the jailbreak part.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And there's also there's some fun technology happening there also. Part of Angus discovers that he has the ability to become invisible.
Only to the surveillance devices.
To surveillance devices,
which I have a conceptual problem with, but I'm willing to let it go because the story can't happen without that. Right.
Yeah, if you're bending electromagnetic fields such that light passes around you, that should work for human optics as well as, Yeah.
If the cameras don't use visible light, I'll buy it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If they work completely independently of the visible light spectrum. But again, without this technology, the story can't happen.
Yes.
Or if it had worked for human eyes as well.
Yeah.
He wanted his cake and eat it too in that particular aspect. Oh, we see our first Kazi in this book, don't we?
Yeah, the attempt on the, what is his name?
Sexton Vertigus.
Sexton Vertigus. His names. Yeah.
The elder statesman who was the captain who made first contact with
Yes.
the Amnion.
Yeah.
Yep, they send a walking human bomb to kill him, and he's saved only accidentally because Min Donner, the enforcement director, has been sent there by Warden Dios
Yes.
to plant a seed to get him to introduce this bill of severance so that the UMCP will no longer be beholden to the UMC or to Holt Fastener.
Yes. Yeah, that was an interesting sequence, and it's weird. It feels, it was fascinating, and it feels like it belongs in a different book. I liked it. I like a great little sequence, and it ties in politically to everything else that's going on, but it just tonally and everything else, it feels very different from the rest of the book. Yeah, it's interesting.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Well, and at the time, it certainly seems unmotivated. Now, again, this will continue to unfold.
Yes.
And lo and behold, it's yet another thread in this massive skein that turns into a lovely tapestry or hideous tapestry.
Yeah.
Hideous, I think, is a better word.
Okay, so book 3, we're midpoint of this series. Where does this book rank for you? So you've read the next 2. Is it hurtling towards an epic conclusion that's like, okay, book 5 is the best, and these are rungs on the ladder to get to book 5, or?
This book is largely a thrill ride for me. And again, it's got the self-contained Billingate adventure, but it's also got these other larger threads, that extend into book 2 and to book 4. If there's a slog of a book, I think it's book 4.
Interesting.
But by and large, this whole series is a page turner for me.
Yeah.
Now sometimes it's a page turner because it's like, wow, this is exciting. What's happening?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a page turner. It's like, get over yourself. Quit whining. Yes, you're not a girl. You're a boy. Okay, you stopped whining. I'll start reading again.
There's a lot of whining in this book. There's a lot of internal. I don't know. I wouldn't characterize it as whining. It all feels very justified. But there's a lot of time spent on characters' internal anguish.
Yeah, and this is Donaldson, right? We get to spend a lot of time inside everyone's tortured head, and everyone has a tortured head.
Everyone does.
I am thankful I'm not a character in a Donaldson universe.
Indeed.
He really likes tortured souls, and he really wants us to understand them. Not necessarily empathize with, but to understand them.
All right, so sidebar here. I think you said the only skulls that you've read is Red Shirts. Right. So one of the ideas of that book is the ethical implications of creating pain for entertainment, even if it's happening to fictional people. So, and with Scalzi, he's particularly talking about these fictional people actually they take on an independent reality. And that's a little bit different. But psychological studies have shown that if you tell somebody, if you relay a traumatic event to them, and then you say, haha, no, that actually didn't happen, it doesn't matter, okay? You still traumatize them. So is there an ethical conundrum in having traumatic literature? It's obviously it's everybody's choice. They can choose whether to engage with it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. But is torture in fiction, does it actually come close to torture in real life in some way?
Yeah, and that's asked, people talk about, the violence in video games or when I was youth, the violence in television or the sex and the nudity in television.
Oh, to me, that's different because the argument there has always been it desensitizes the youth. Mm-hmm. And it's always been sort of a classist, ageist sort of thing. It's like we can't let these people have access to these things.
But I mean, the idea that it desensitizes anyone. I mean, youth might be more susceptible to desensitization than those of us with a little more mileage under our belts. But that doesn't mean we don't get desensitized as well. I find myself desensitized to the trauma of world events simply because there's so many traumatic world events that, are going on out there. I really empathize with what's going on with Ukrainian people, but I have a hard time really getting worked up about it because it's far from the only, geopolitical calamity going on out there.
That's true. I don't think of that as desensitization, though, because like if I meet someone who's from Ukraine, I don't just kind of go,
Well, okay, maybe it's sensory overload in a way.
It's more like sensory overload, or the fact that it's remote, it's presented through a lens. But then when I don't find that people, however many violent video games they've watched, for the most part, like if an animal gets run over by a car, they're just like, whatever, I've seen worse in Call of Duty, because that's immediate and it's real and it's very visceral.
So I don't know. I mean, I am sure, in any aspect of fiction, right, there the idea that you would be writing about torture, the idea you'd be writing about murder, about rape, the idea you'd be writing about theft, the idea you'd be writing about child pornography, any of these horrific things, they're horrific things, but that doesn't mean exploring them is inherently a wrong thing to do. I mean, real world exploration, yes, none of those things are things we should be doing.
Yes.
But the fact that one wants to envision this and write about it as a path to, again, forging these characters into the what they are.
Yeah.
It would, to some degree, terrify me to have somebody sitting there taking notes on, I never would have thought about using the toenail clippers in this way, right? But I don't think this is not an ABCs of how to break a person.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, but it is a very thorough exploration of how these people got broken.
Yeah, there's also, I think there's an ethical question of, and we talked about this last episode with the zone implant, where you introduce a sort of thing and you gloss over its negative aspects, which Donaldson is not doing.
He is not. And it's a high crime, actually. Unauthorized use of a zone implant will get you killed.
Yes.
It carries the death penalty, right?
Yeah.
It's there for exactly one reason. Gap sickness exists.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's the ultimate crime in this series. He talks about that quite a bit. Yeah. Yep. And we said, that, Donaldson's not the first character to treat in rape, and it's been sort of romanticized in some books and glorified in some books, and he doesn't do that here either.
It is neither romanticized nor glorified.
And that's one of the reasons it's so hard to read, because it's just like, it's punishing. Yeah. But yeah. All right, end sidebar.
That's good. Yeah, Donaldson books are never happy.
They are not.
That's one thing you can rely on. Again, there's lots of details plot-wise we could talk about, but this book it's fun. Again, I love watching. We see Milos Taverner completely disintegrate. We see Nick really starting to come apart at the seams. So Nick's transition, in this overall arc, right? He started out arguably as a hero way back in book one.
Okay. You could see him in book one. He could be kind of the Han Solo type.
Right?
Yeah. Han
Solo type, although he's an evil Han Solo. But Han did shoot first, people.
Yes, yeah.
Han shot Greedo?
Yeah.
Under the table.
Greedo, yes.
Yep. Yeah. Anyway, where was I going with that? He clearly becomes the victim during book 2, Morn's victim, although Morn is clearly his victim as well, right? They are committed to breaking each other in that second book.
I don't know that I'd go so far as to call him a victim. He gets slapped upside the head, and he has it coming. And I guess you can have a little bit of empathy for him, but I wouldn't go so far as to call him Morn's still the victim here.
Yeah.
Although she's crawling her way out of that
she's
hole.
finding power in being the victim.
Yeah.
But now with his encounter with Saurus, we see more of the image is shaken away.
Yes.
Right? We're getting closer and closer to what's inside Nick, and it turns out there's not very much in there.
Yeah.
Unlike Morn, who's got this diamond core that simply is uncorruptible and unbreakable, there's nothing like that in Nick.
That is one of the things that makes this book hard for me, is knowing there's 2 more books. And also because of the way, I mean, Donaldson, because there are 2 more books, is the way he does this. Because there's a moment where we see that Angus has some genuine affection for Morn, and he wants to rescue her, and he's pleased that he can, that his programming allows this. Yeah, it's like, I don't know how much I'm rooting for the rapist, but okay, yeah, there's something in there. There's some genuine emotion, and there's a possibility of a hero turn here for Angus, and a little bit of an empathy for Nick also. But we know, and this is like Jaime Lannister in the latter seasons of Game of Thrones. It's like, he, rooting for him and Brienne, and then no. But we know there's 2 more books here, and we know Donaldson's not going to leave it at that. So this hero turn doesn't land, at least not yet. Maybe, I don't know what happens in the next 2 books. So maybe, I know we're supposed to get a full shuffle. It's hard to see how you can redeem Angus, but because there's so much more to go, there's going to be just more awfulness to come, I'm sure, for both of these characters. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to give anything away, but I will say this. Books 1, 2, and 3, there are passages I cringe at. Books 4 and 5, there are not.
Oh, good to know.
To the best of my recollection. So we are through the worst of the individual cruelty.
Whew. Okay. Well, I can see, just based on the second half of book 2 and all of book 3, that, I mean, Brandon Sanderson talks about this. People say, "Oh my God, Brandon Sanderson, your books are so long and they don't get exciting until the end." He's like, "Well, because I'm building this whole, I have an end in mind and it's epic, but in order to get that, I have to put all the pieces in place. And I can't just narrate it to you. I've got to build that world and create these characters, and they have to be believable characters in that world. I have to show how they operate. And then when I have everything in place, kaboom, yeah." And you can see that Donaldson is doing this. We're leading up to something, and it's just, as you say, it's going to accelerate and accelerate and accelerate. He says it's a thrill ride for the last, the final book. But yeah.
Yeah. And again, you asked me what I like about this particular book. This is a moment in the middle of that overall arc, that epic and however many 1,000-page spanning arc. This is it has that self-contained mini adventure in it. Like I said, it's action-packed.
Yeah.
The events of Billingate, the capture and rescue of Davies and Morn, the heroic links and miracles of technology that Angus goes through in order to save both of them. The escape not only from Billingate itself, but from the Amnion.
How do you enjoy the political plot? Because that didn't engage me to nearly the same extent. Okay.
I don't know if I'm handicapped or if I'm benefiting from the fact that I know where it's going.
Okay.
Right. So having read this series through, this has got to be my 4th or 5th pass through it. I know where it's going, and what I am in is I'm in awe of how the foundation is being laid.
Gotcha. Nice.
Because I see where he's putting down threads.
Yeah.
And I know what those threads are going to combine with. I know that the ropes are going to come. So you're just talking about how it takes a lot of world building to get to that climax.
Yeah.
Now knowing what the climax is, as I'm going through these, for the 4th or 5th or 6th time, I'm really just stunned at the fact he had the vision to put this thing together.
Wow.
And the fact that he's building the Taj Mahal out of Legos. And the first time you watch somebody doing that, you're like, oh, wow, look, he put down another yellow Lego.
Yeah.
But if you know what the finished product is and you see what they're doing, like, oh, that's how he got that subtle color shift.
Yeah. Okay.
Not a great analogy, but.
No, I'll buy that. Have you read the Cormoran Strike books, the detective novels by Rowling?
Does not ring a bell.
After Harry Potter, she wrote an adult novel called The Casual Vacancy, and then she wrote a series of detective novels. She's up to 6 now, and I just found out that there are TV adaptations of them on HBO.
Oh,
And I'm watching those again, and there's a character who shows up as a temp at this detective office and later becomes an actual detective. And this character, it is so poignant to watch this character knowing what happens to her in later books. And she's so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and sweet and innocent, and you're just like, oh, it hurts to watch. It hurts to watch.
it's the same thing. It's a different trip the second time
Yes,
through.
it really is.
Right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's what I'm experiencing here. So,
Yeah.
and it may well be the first time I was reading through it. I did a whole bunch of skimming when I got to those political intrigue parts. Why should I care? Don't care. Don't care. Why should I care? But, that's not happening this time.
As I'm reading through it, it's interesting. It kind of reminds me of Antony and Cleopatra, which, that's one of my least favorite of the Shakespeare plays. And there's the love story at the core between Mark Antony and Cleopatra. And then there's a whole bunch of people standing around in the Senate going blah, 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 blah. And then cut back to Antony and Cleopatra, and then cut back to blah, 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 blah. It's like, whack. Yeah, but you can't, of course.
Yeah. Of course. It's like trying to read all the songs in a Tolkien novel or
oh my goodness.
every word of description. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is not like that.
Yeah.
At least not for me, not on this trip.
All right. Good to know.
All right.
All right. That's all I got on book 3. What else you got?
That works for me.
Okay. Great. So on to book 4 and book 5.
All right.
Yeah.
So we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.